Good evening. I'm Charlie Tesh. Welcome to Dead Air Live. This is a historic moment in the city of Somerville. Last week, RCN BECO announced plans at a public hearing that they would build a new cable system in order to compete with the existing system, Warner Cable. That means there'd be at least 2 cable companies in the city, possibly 9X will even get involved too. And we might have 3 cable companies all competing to provide services to people at home. According to City Hall, this will be excellent for the people of the city because the competition will drive rates down and improve services. The companies will have to respond to each other's initiatives. One of the questions, though, is the companies coming in will be bringing in new technologies in order to do this competition. And this promises really to change the face of cable as we know it. RCN says that they're going to be offering internet services and telephone services and cable services, and that they'll all be combined in one system. And so one subscriber will be able to get all these different services from one company. They're going to do this with a fiber optic network, which will allow them to bring in a lot more channels than we've had before. RCN says they're going to do 110 channels. People will be able to hook up their computers, their home computers, and be able to get access to the internet, be able to use their computers to communicate with other computer users around the country, around the city. And there are a lot of questions about how people will be able to do that. Where will they get the training, and how will they know how to do that? At the same time, there are big changes going on in the broadcast industry with a conversion to digital television. The old way of delivering signals won't be the same. The signal quality will be different. We'll have high definition television. The signals will be very much more like computer signals. And the whole difference between broadcast television and computer use will become very gray and start to disappear. The question is, what will this mean to viewers at home? What kind of service can you anticipate getting? How will you relate to this whole internet business? Will you be able to take the initiative to find what information you want, or will you just have like a cable box and you just push a couple buttons and some pre-packaged programs or pieces of information, whatever products they usually call them in the industry, I think, will just get downloaded to you. What effect will this have on public access programming? There will be all new production techniques, new equipment will be needed, more training will be needed for people to learn how to use this stuff, and we have to wonder how all of that's going to fit together. Then what effect will this have on the general level of public discussion? Now, public access is the only place really that people can conduct any kind of a discussion over the television medium. The internet has opened that up incredibly to people who have computers, because you can get access to all different points of view. Anybody who wants to set up a website or something like that can put out information that other people can get. But what will be the impact on the public discussion in the long run? It depends on what kind of access people have and what kind of training and all those issues. And finally, what is the impact on the general cultural life of the whole community in terms of now you can watch regular television and you can see just what people are providing, but with all of the new technologies, it may be possible to drastically expand the kind of stuff that you can get. So we want to talk about all those questions tonight, and we have a great panel here to talk about it. So let me introduce folks that are here. First of all, we have George Fifield, who's the director of Video Space, is a video artist and a member of the Boston Area Access Coalition. And thanks for coming and joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
We have Kate Snow, who is the director of the Somerville Community Computing Center, and which is very much involved in providing training and access to computers for people in the community. We have Stan Poreda, who's the executive director of Shrewsbury Public Access. Shrewsbury has a unique situation compared to us in that the city operates the cable, the telephone, and the electric utility. Is there more to it than that?
They don't run the whole, they have a phone system for the city itself, but not for the residents.
Not for all of the residents.
But,
Okay, well, we'll get into that more. Thanks for joining us.
thank you.
Mimi Graney is the executive director of Somerville Community Access Television, and more likely familiar to our viewers. And we'll be talking a lot about what's going on with the city and the city's plans. And finally, we have Paul Berg, who is the director of Newton Public Access and the state coordinator for public policy of the Alliance for Community Media. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Let me start with Mimi. You were at the public hearing last week, and you've been in touch with City Hall. Can you fill us in a little bit on what's going on right now, and what's the timeline? What's the process that we're involved in right now?
Well, maybe backtrack a little bit of last year. The federal government passed the Telecommunications Act, which said that there could no longer be monopolies of cable television in particular communities, that there was anyone could go into cable television and could go into pretty much any community that they wanted to. So that allowed any company to go into cable services, telephone service, internet service. And right after that time, you saw a lot of mergers, 9X merging with Bell Atlantic, US West with Continental, I believe, at the time. And you're seeing providers who are bringing not just cable television, but also telephone and internet services. And some traditionally telephone companies that had just been local service are now going into long distance. And in keeping with that, a lot of companies have been looking at Somerville to come in here because of the density of the population. It's a small community and we're sort of have very typical demographics, 4 square miles, 17,000 households currently getting cable systems. So for a small initial outlay, they can get a lot of subscribers.
Somerville's really a plum.
Yes, yes. And one of the first companies to approach the city to come in with cable service was 9X, and people might have heard about the broadband network that was going to come in, and at one time they were talking about video dial tone and a wireless system, and at this time those plans have been shelved since 9X merged with Bell Atlantic. And the latest competitor to approach the city is RCN, which is part of a larger company called CTEC. And RCN currently is providing cable television in Boston without a public access component. And they're coming to Somerville, sort of doing it in the more traditional way of having a cable franchise, similar to what is happening in the relationship that we have with Time Warner, that they actually have a contract with the city to provide cable television under a certain medium, in a certain manner.
Now, why is it happening different in Somerville from the way it's happening in Boston?
Well, it's a rather complicated thing, and it had to do with failure of Continental to serve the whole community. It was during a certain time when there was a regulation called video dial tone, and some of it was just kind of sort of got in under some regulations, and they've been grandfathered for them. RCN has approached the city, and right now the time frame is last Tuesday was the public hearing, and today, May 6th, was the deadline for public comments to give input. Then advertisement has basically gone out saying these are what the city is looking for cable service or for telecommunications service. And then those companies respond with what's called a Form 100, and the deadline for that is the beginning of June. Then the city goes into negotiations and signs a contract with whichever providers they think can most adequately cover their needs. RCN is planning on having a successful contract signed with the city, a franchise, and are hoping to start laying cables by the beginning of September. And as you said, they'll be bringing in an all-fiber system that will be both telephone, local and long distance, internet service, and cable television.
All right. Yeah, how will all these services fit together? Or how will people relate to this at first? I mean, will people see a change when the new system is set up, or will it be just the way it is now? Should we anticipate, for example, this show won't be on the RCN channel, or how is that going to work?
Well, one of the things that came up in the public hearing is specific questions around public access. And one of the things that came out in the Telecommunications Act was this theory around a level playing field, that whatever the city demands of Time Warner, they have to likewise demand of any other competitor. So among the things that Somerville received from Time Warner under that contract was 3 PEG access channels, which stands for Public, Educational, and Governmental. So on the Time Warner system, there's Channel 3, which is SCAT, Channel 15, the educational channel, and Channel 16, the governmental channel. And then the city also levies a 5% franchise fee on cable services to fund those 3 access channels. And then they also receive an equipment fund on the initial signing of the contract that provides the equipment for those channels to run. Because without equipment to actually produce programming, there's nothing. It's just an empty space. And so Somerville likewise is going to be asking from RCN for 3 public access channels and for the 5% franchise fee. There is some debate around how that franchise fee is going to be determined. It's 5% of their gross revenues. And in Time Warner, all their gross revenues are based on cable services, and public access exists on a cable system. On RCN, since they're going to be providing video, voice, and data, can the 5% franchise fee be based on all of their gross revenues, or do we have to pull out just the cable revenues? And there's some problems of how are you going to, once all the money gets into the same pot, how are you going to be able to keep the cable revenues differentiated? In the future, is sort of video and internet going to become so commingled that it's going to be easy to move things into internet services, and therefore the whole concept of cable can be wiped out, even though it's going to look an awful lot at home like it's cable television.
So they might provide what now looks like broadcast services, but use internet technology to do it, and then say, well, this isn't broadcast TV anymore. Now it's internet service, and we don't have to.
It's a data service, not a video service.
We have in Newton Continental Cablevision, which is about to change its name. We're waiting on tenterhooks for when that happens. They've been sold to US West, but they haven't changed their name yet. They are offering cable modem internet access over their hybrid fiber system to subscribers in Newton. It's one of the only communities that has that offer right now. And they exclude that revenue from franchise fees to the city. Based, I believe, very loosely on an original franchise agreement which said that something they were testing at the time called GTE Main Street was excluded. Now that was an experimental so-called interactive game and product channel on their cable system run by GTE, which was a phone company. But the interesting thing is that as a result of that, there's no other than the so-called social contract, which Continental had to give things away as a result of having overcharged their customers in a settlement with the FCC, school access to internet is being provided in all the schools, but that's the only access to the internet that's provided. So what we have is a have and have not kind of a circumstance where people who want access to television services have Newton cable public access to use television communications devices, but there's no similar access for citizens to computer technology. And I guess the bottom line in all of this is the public rights of way are being used by the same cable to carry both the internet information and the cable information. The internet service is very expensive. It's a $100 installation and $50 a month. It is, however, about as fast as a similar service that phone company offers for $200 or $300 a month. So it's a remarkable step up in technology. But I think the problem is that it's going so fast, and some of the time frame that I hear Mimi talking about and some of the dates that I hear seem to me extremely quick for something like this to be happening in Somerville when I don't know exactly the history of the original franchise, but I would guess that the city probably went through a long process to put together what exists here today at that time. And I just wonder if we are going in the wrong direction with all of the technological changes for us to be overnight saying, well, oh, yeah, okay, this is what we want, this is fine, without lengthier study, because we're going to wind up with people that don't have access to technology because they're poor.
Right.
And that is clearly why we started, one of the reasons we started public access to television in the first place was so that citizens who didn't own a TV station or a newspaper or a powerful position in the community could communicate.
Right.
And with convergence of the technologies, we don't want to lose that in these other areas.
Right. That's a big topic that I'd like to put off a little bit.
Okay.
But we'll definitely come back to it later. We have a tape of from the hearing that was held last week. We just have a brief segment of Scott Burnside from RCN making a presentation about what RCN expects to bring to the city. So let's take a look at that tape now.
Why don't I just give you then give for the record and for
We hear it?
everyone here present just a very quick overview of what
You have to get
and
them
who
to-
RCN is and what we intend to do. As most of you know, the Communications Act of 1996 calls for, among other things, competition in not just telephone services, but also in video services as well. And my company has a long historic background in both telephony and traditional cable television franchising, and obviously saw with the passage of that act an opportunity to merge those technologies and offer them in a competitive package in markets such as Boston, New York, etc. And we've been working very hard with city officials throughout the Boston area to make that happen. We're most delighted to have formed back in, I think it was January or February. Actually, I guess it was the very end of December, to be perfectly accurate, a joint venture with Boston Edison Corporation, who I think most of you have heard of. If you haven't, you probably haven't been in the Boston area very long, but obviously a very prominent utility, power utility with lots of experience in building and delivering service. And interestingly enough, although maybe some of you at least don't see the relationship right now, the ability to build a network, whether it be for delivering power services or communication services, is kind of basically a common effort from a construction standpoint, and with the use and deployment of fiber optics, we will be able to build on their network, BECO's network, and deliver very quickly, I think, a quality of products and services and communications that we're very excited about. We will offer, as this process comes to an end and we have a franchise granted, which I expect will be the end result of this effort, a full range of cable channel services, something in the neighborhood of 110 channels. We'll have a telephone product, both local and long-distance service, all merged into one provider. And that's essentially what was intended to happen when the Congress passed the Communications Act of '96. And I think, if I can be so bold, we are at least one of the first, if not the first, company to actually put that congressional intent into action. Now, I know that some of you here are concerned about how this happens and what happens to the public education and government channels and how those services are provided, and if in fact we are required to provide them, and are we going to provide service throughout the community. Let me take those questions very quickly and anticipate them, and then if there's any follow-up to them,
Kate, let me turn to you. You're the director of the Somerville Community Computing Center. Tell us about the center, a little bit what you do there, and how does that relate to the internet and some of the stuff we're talking about?
The Community Computing Center is actually one of the oldest in the region, actually in the country. Was started almost 10 years ago by somebody, Antonia Stone, who was concerned that people who wouldn't have access to computer technology were going to keep becoming further and further economically disadvantaged. Obviously, 10 years ago, there wasn't an internet. Now, part of what we provide to the community is internet access. But not only do we provide access to the computers and the technology itself, but what you might call intellectual access, or the fact that we're not simply setting people in front of computers, but doing it in a moderated, mediated way, much the same way I presume you do with cable access, where you're giving people training on how to use the equipment, how to produce things themselves. As the internet's become more important for us, and when more of the things we need to help folks get access to, we've been more and more concerned about helping people produce information for the internet. I think it would be a very easy thing for lots of our programs, and there are other community computing centers all over the country, to simply provide places for more and more people who don't have their own computers to consume the information that's out there on the internet. And part of our mission as in terms of keeping equitable access is equitable ability to produce information for the internet and to be a giver as well as a taker.
What sort of things might people be producing?
Well, many of the people coming into the Community Computer Center are people who are looking for jobs. They are also people who are looking for places to output their own creative energies. It may be somebody who is homeless or formerly homeless who is writing a novel. So currently, the technology is being used to produce a traditional form of media, a book. The internet, having an ability to build a website, would actually give someone a chance to tell their story in a new medium. Say it's a book. It might also be to make themselves accessible to employers, to put a resume or a work history or a portfolio of their own up on the net. It's also for educators. We often have teachers who are in producing materials for their classes. The internet gives them a way to interact with other teachers and other students. So there are a number of ways, and we're just beginning to see.
It sounds like this is kind of analogous to the, somewhat ancient now idea of the free press and people being able to, print whatever they want. You want to print a pamphlet or you want to print a book or whatever, you can get access. That was technology that was generally available to people, and not many people do that now, but they could do it over the internet.
Well, I think forgotten when we talk about individuals or organizations, community organizations, activist organizations. The internet has become an incredible tool for reaching out, for changing people's minds, for showing information, for pulling together in one place all the human rights information, say, about a particular country or a particular part of the world, or all of the dates for events in a certain area. So it is like the free press. And when it first came, when the internet, those long 2 years ago, when the World Wide Web was just sort of hitting us, I remember thinking, this is our chance to get people to suddenly narrow the gap very quickly between those who can produce information for everybody else and those who can't. Because suddenly anybody with access to a website has access to the millions of people who have computers on their desks.
Right.
And economically speaking, currently the people who have computers on their desks are traditionally highly educated, employed, people working in jobs that can afford that kind of equipment,
Right.
or there are people who can afford them at home.
Yeah, it still takes a lot of money to build your own website.
Exactly, and we that's changing. I think, although it does get cheaper, part of the problem that we who provide access to technology face, or part of the challenge, is not simply to keep bringing the new computers in that can handle the new processes, but know what those new computers need to be. And although maybe someday computers will be $200 a piece, as cheap as a TV, and everyone will have them in their home. But the energy and the knowledge and the know-how it takes to keep up is something that that centers like ours will always be necessary for and continue to do, the same way that an access station like SCAT keeps up with video technology.
Sure. And it seems like the internet and access to it and is very similar in its role in society as what public access is. I mean, it's a place for people to exchange ideas and information, and it seems to be just as important as public access. It just seems like it's almost the same thing, and
I think it could be even more than that. With public access to TV, it's we're empowering people to stand up and participate in community and to produce, and they're being active and doing something.
Right.
With computer technology and computers and the internet, I think we're in the midst of this revolution where if you're not using it, then you're not part of society. This might be not where we are right now, but it's going to be that way. And you know, we're always sometimes talking about, like, well, what could we do with computer access? We could teach people how to get, you know, how to do word processing, or maybe they could produce a web page. Soon, I don't think that'll be a question, because everybody will know. If you don't know how to use a computer, you know, where are you? You won't be able to get a job. You know, it's just like if you have a phone. If you don't have a phone, you're not going to be able to communicate with anybody.
I wonder if it seems to be going in that direction, but I kind of wonder in terms of the proposals that we've all heard about, you know, the set-top box, you know, that's going to somehow sit on top of your TV and provide you access to everything. But it seems like so many people, I mean, they're always, what is it, like 80 or 90% of people are unable to set the clock on their VCR. It's something like that, and I just wonder, I know that that industry people are looking at ways to hook people into this, you know. So I think maybe the idea of the set-top box won't necessarily be so interactive, but will tend to be more like broadcast television is now, kind of that model, and that people will either get stuck into that role of interacting, you know, may not find their way out of that.
One of the big concerns, I think, is that to remember that it's not just information in, but that the computer gives you the possibility of doing the information out,
Right.
is to telling your side of the story, and that one direction that the internet seems to be going, a commercial direction, is to have a vast amount of information, a wide bandwidth, if you would, coming into the house, but just a narrow amount of information leaving. And I think that's very important to recognize and to fight, that it's very important to have equal bandwidth in and out, that you can get out your story in as detailed a way as the information coming in. Otherwise, everyone's just going to be sitting at home and clicking on, yes, I want to buy this, no, I don't want to buy this, yes, I want to buy this. And
The most detailed sentence you write is your Visa card number, right?
Exactly.
We don't want
exactly.
that.
But I think, and if you do then have wide bandwidth in, wide bandwidth out, if you can tell your story as well as you can get it in, then the need for education, the need for places like access centers where they can provide the training and the on-hand experience is very important.
You're talking, it sounds like a real change in the model of how these systems work. We have cable, which is high speed in, and in the case of, you know, home shopping or something, it's very low speed back out, right?
Just a phone line.
But it sounds like the model you're talking about is the same as like at the telephone system, how the telephone system works now, except high speed instead of low speed.
So that in fact you can be communicating to people all over the world at, you know, with video, with, you know, if you make a musical composition, you can play it to people all over the world. If you make a television show, you can show it to people all over the world. You can put this kind of stuff on your website. All of this is coming very quickly.
Yeah. Do you anticipate that there's going to be a problem getting that?
I think that economically it's not in the interest of a lot of the providers to provide that.
Yeah, both the cable industry and the telephone industry have a very different understanding of the term interactive than we may be using, because 2 years ago, I guess, at the Alliance for Community Media Conference in Boston, we had the I'm not sure, I think it was Bell Atlantic was here doing a presentation on what they called their interactive electronic neighborhood. And what that meant was they told us what was for sale and we told them what we wanted to buy. And that was the end of the interactivity. We could find out about 16 different things that were happening in our community by clicking on a category.
Right.
Now that was considered to be interactivity. And interactivity to the cable industry has meant a set-top box which enables people to order pay-per-view movies. I mean, this is not to criticize their commercial entities. I mean, obviously they're in the business of making money, and that's the one good way of doing it. But that is not what we mean by interactive, and that's not what we need in communities for interactive. We need to be able to express ourselves in longer sentences than a Visa card number and a yes, I want this in my shopping cart kind of a click. That's not what we need.
And I think the history of access and the history of community computing centers is that if you give people that kind of access, they will use it. They will. It's not a question of people just sitting at home wanting to absorb, but they want to give back. They want to create, and they want to make information available and art available.
One of the biggest struggles we've had with public access is that for 30 years people have just been fed television without any understanding that they could do it themselves. And it was this sort of dreamy, magical thing that these experts made, and you just took in, and we all grew up that way. And so, working at public access centers, it's really, you have to sort of drill it into people that, no, you can do this. It's easy, and we'll show you how, and you can do it. And Somerville has always been a model for the rest of the country of how our community can do it, and by seeing all the diverse parts of this community and people producing TV on their own. And so we've been battling that. We're at this time now with the internet and computers where now's the time to let people know what you're saying, that it is an interactive thing. It's something that you participate in, and it works both ways. Not what the providers and companies are out there saying. They're saying, get a computer because you have web pages that you can surf and just, passively sit there and
And wait.
Watch it load up. Yeah.
Well, but I think some people could say, well, you can set up a web page. The internet is a free medium, and that, with sort of a modest investment. But I see the future moving, that the web pages are going more video related, and that to actually have a website that has some legitimacy, so that it's not the equivalent of a crayon kind of scrawling, but it sort of looks like a nicely typewritten page, that you're going to need more elaborate, both a faster computer and more disk space, and you're going to need more sophisticated equipment. And that access centers are going to be even more important because individuals might not necessarily be able to own that, but communally, as the equivalent of a library, we could own it, and we could enable people to share that kind of resources.
I think the last 2 years, for us, the example is the use of a scanner. 2 years ago, it was perfectly acceptable to have a web page that didn't have photographs on it. It was really cool to see one, but you didn't see them very often. And now there's no question that you need to be able to have photographic images on a web page for appeal, even if they're small, so they load quickly. And a scanner is something a community computing center can finance or can get donated, that everyone can use, and that artists do use and use to put their work up and to create new work. It's a new tool.
And already on the web, you've got real audio, which is like radio, except being delivered over the internet, and real TV. So already these things are the technology's there, and it's just a question of giving people the tools to use it.
I believe it's Arlington, Texas carries its public access channel on a website 24 hours a day. All of their programming is on the web. But I think it's interesting. We're thinking of all of these things, and we're talking about a process that's going on in Somerville. And one of the concerns is, are there going to be resources for these things in the community? And I think you can't emphasize enough the amount of money involved in all of these industries. I mean, the cable industry itself in a community of this size, I don't know the statistics in Somerville, but I would guesstimate, $5, $6, $7 million a year in gross revenues for a cable company. The internet is that exponentially multiplied in terms of the phone service and internet access, the kind of money that's going to be made from this. And I think that one of the things that you see satellite dish companies struggling over is that they don't have local exclusive programming like public access and local broadcast channels. So to say that public access or community computing centers do not generate content that is of interest to the people that live in those communities is contrary to what even the industry itself is acknowledging, is that we need what people bring to public access. People in the community, that's one of the reasons that they cite when they're asked, why do I subscribe to cable? Well, because I want CNN because I don't get home in time for news, and I want all the sports. Oh, and by the way, I like to keep my eye on what the city government is doing, or I like to see what the local community groups are putting on. This is important, and I think if we're talking about funding for these things, it is in the interests of these industries to support these things. And I don't understand, for example, I don't understand why Bill Gates doesn't set up a community computing center in every community in America. National Geographic learned this lesson years ago. You give away the slide projectors and get people to buy the films, I mean, it's an old lesson, but, and that's what we're talking about really, is that kind of a small 5 cents on the dollar fee in order to teach people how to use these things that they want to sell to people.
Let me just pause for a moment to let our viewers know that if you have questions, you want to join the discussion, please call us up, 628-8826, and we'll take your questions and see what kind of answers we can come up with. Yeah, the whole issue of money and access and what we were talking about of internet being so similar to public access television as we know it raises this whole issue that's sort of confronts the city right now of how do we deal with the internet revenues, and should they be a part of the 5%, and where should that money go, and how should it be administered? And I expect you would suggest that it just go to the computing center.
Well, except that in some sense I feel like we are with the cable access station. Not quite Siamese twins, but pretty darn close sisters in terms of our missions and the kinds of things we deliver to the community. And there are some communities like Shrewsbury, like Malden, like Lowell, who provide the computer access in the same places they provide the cable access. And I think in some sense we're just on the opposite sides of the city. But it certainly was to our dismay when the Telecommunications Act was passed in 1996 that there were no provisions for community computing centers, and that was a huge failing of that act, I think. But as contracts like this get negotiated, I think we need to work to encourage cities, municipalities, and cable companies, telecommunications companies, to think broadly about what they're doing. And as far as our missions are concerned, if the money comes in for public access, it may go to a public access cable station, but it should be clearly with the understanding that public access is more and more about an incredible convergence of a large number of technologies.
Good. And we have a phone call, I think. Let's see what we can do here. Hello, you're on Dead Air Live?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, I'm finding this really interesting. I wanted to actually focus the conversation a little bit more on what's going on now presently in Somerville, and I guess that will be pertinent to the other directors of the other access centers in other cities as well, as this kind of the wave moves forward. It seems like right now Somerville is kind of at the front of the wave of this new competition thing. And I was wondering, it seems like a lot of this is at the mercy of the will of the government of Somerville, and the mayor of Somerville needs to be supportive of public access. And I was wondering if you knew what the status of the mayor's commitment to public access is, and if he's not supportive, what people can do about it, or how people can get involved.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll take it offline.
Great, thank you. Do you want to answer that, Mimi?
Well, at the public hearing, Paul Train, who's the director of the Office of Communications for the city, basically expressed the administration's attitude and policy of that they are supportive of the 3 PEG access channels. They are going for the maximum allowable franchise fee of 5%. of the gross revenues, which is a similar agreement to what's with Time Warner. And sort of keeping with the level playing field concept, that they're going for a similar agreement to what they had with Time Warner. The city funds SCAT equivalent to 1.57 of Warner's gross revenues, and it would be a similar deal with what's happening with RCN should that franchise fee be agreed to.
So how much money is that in a year?
Last year was $121,000, which is a little less than it's about a little less than a third of SCAT's total operating fund budget. The rest we do fundraising for. Under the Time Warner contract that was signed in '92, SCAT received $300,000 to last us for the next 10 years worth of video equipment. So spread over, when you think of our initial outlay just to upgrade some of the systems, was about half of that budget. So we've really only got $150,000 to last us. And when you look at how much the price of one deck at, $6,000, $7,000 at a pop, the money goes quite quickly. And as part of this RCN contract, the city has said that they're not interested in going for public access equipment, that they're looking for something of equivalent value. Of course, from our perspective, we'd like that to go towards public access because of some of the things we're talking about of this digital convergence. Digital systems, it's meaning that we're going to have to overhaul things quite quickly. And not only are we dealing with the ongoing wear and tear of equipment that gets a lot of use, but we're dealing with needing to upgrade it to whole new systems, so that where we might have been able to scramble and put a couple pieces together, we're needing to look at a whole new system because things aren't going to be compatible anymore. So that's where the city's at.
Right. Paul, you were talking earlier about how much money is involved in
Well, yeah,
all of this.
there is a lot, but then there's another side to that too, actually, which is RCN is coming in to get a cable franchise, as I understand, in Somerville, which is what Time Warner already has. And this in the cable industry is called an overbuild. The reason that cable companies were monopolies in communities was not because mean old Mr. Mustard grabbed all the all the money and just held on to it, because it was an economic monopoly. It was a situation in which there was really in many communities only room for one company to service the cable subscribers. It is very rare that two companies survive in overbuilds in communities in this country. I mean, single digits. There are communities that are divided up, in which if Los Angeles has 19 cable companies in 19 different sections, okay, we're talking they serve 10 million people, okay, but that's a difference than an overbuild, which, as I understand, is what's RCN is going to come in and offer cable to the same people who already have it. So I think another issue about the money is that there's probably a limited pool of money. Everybody doesn't get cable. It hasn't happened in any community in America yet that there's been 100% penetration for cable subscribers. So while I could say on one hand, yes, there's lots of money to go around, the other economic issue that needs to be looked at is who's going to lose this battle in 5 years, because someone is. History tells us someone is. So is it a horse race that who we're going to bet on, or it's an interesting question. But I guess back to your original question, I think that what communities find where there are successful access operations is that cable companies, if they are brought to the table to admit what they really feel, are supportive of that. They would prefer to have 100% dollars. Of course, everyone would like to make 5 cents more on the dollar, but given the fact that they're required to do some community service, what better way than to give something to the people that makes the people want to buy their product?
Yeah. All right, let's just pause for a moment. I think we have another phone call here. Hello, you're on Dead Air Live.
Hi, I like what that gentleman just said, and this is something I think didn't come through in the hearing. I saw some of that hearing on SCAT. That is that it's not just something that the city should be asking for. It's something that RCN should see gives them a competitive advantage. RCN came into Boston without offering access to the community. Well, I don't think that works with Somerville. I think RCN should see that Somerville is a tighter group of communities, and we really value programming that serves us, or at least the right to have that kind of programming. But I wanted to find out, I guess you don't have a representative from RCN, but why is it that RCN went into Boston without offering access, and why are they talking to the city now? And I guess support from the city is there, and that's one of the very important things.
Okay, does somebody want to answer?
I
that?
can try to briefly describe that. RCN began its operation at a time when the Telecommunications Act had yet to be settled, and there was a model called the video dial tone, which was designed to allow the phone company to get into a phone company to get into the cable television business, and this raised all the issues of level playing field that we hear now touted about the Telecommunications Act. But as it so happens, RCN made a filing with the FCC, which was actually inconsistent apparently with the video dial tone provisions, which ended as soon as the Telecommunications Act came into being. So for a brief period of time, they were able to offer this service in the city of Boston, but that's no longer so. I mean, they are going to be required to either be fish or fowl, either to be an OVS system or a cable system. Video dial tone doesn't exist anymore. I don't want to, I can't speak to the motives as to why RCN did it, except to say, and to not accuse them of this, but maximizing profit is what business is about. So if you can get in a business that doesn't have to pay a regulatory fee, you are in a better position than one that does. So that's why they did it. I don't think anyone doubts that they did it because they could do it more cheaply.
Caller, did that answer your question?
Yep, I guess, thank you. I just wanted to also point out, though, maximizing profit means offering the best product, not just cutting down costs at least. I think some of our consumers have to make that point known, that they want a cable provider that serves their community's needs. And if the Somerville community makes that known, then RCN and any other company that wants to work here is going to offer that product, and 5% is not that much.
Right, and I think, well, that's the issue of competition. It's either please me now or please me later. I mean, either you agree to be, to seem to be a wonderful company in the outset, or else down the road, if people learn that they're not getting what they might expect from the other company, then they're going to change and go, someone's going to lose this battle.
Yeah, and ultimately it comes from the consumer.
Right.
We have to ask for it, and we have to make it known. Yeah. And I don't watch SCAT all that much. I do watch it, but I definitely want to be able to watch it. I definitely want it to be there, even if I don't watch it every day. It's just like the right to have a lawyer at a trial or something. I may never in my life need to have a lawyer, but damn it, I want to have that right.
Okay, thanks for your call.
Bye.
All right, we have another call, I think. Hello, welcome to Dead Air Live.
Hello?
Yes, you're on.
Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, very good. Thank you.
I'm calling because I'm very pleased to see you guys up there talking about what is happening in not only Somerville, but in the entire nation and obviously the world today with the changes of technology. And I just wanted to make sure that there was a romantic accent going on the TV on Channel 3. And I just, would like to say that, the importance of public access, in my opinion, as a media educator, is really essential for a developed country like this one, because what is happening is that as time goes by, more and more, very few people are going to take control over the technology and the content. And I think what public access is really important that many people out there don't really understand. And sometimes it is hard for people in organizations like the Somerville Community Access TV to make sure that people understand that public access is only a way for them to exercise the right to express their feelings and opinions. So it's freedom of speech. And I think that that's something that is very valuable. And what boils down to is that that's what reinforces the idea of democracy. And I think that that's something that everybody out there should know. And I just wanted to say that. I think that most people don't play an active role in society. And I feel that working with teenagers is a good example that anybody can do it. And teenagers in Somerville have been very successful, not only making videos within the community, but showing those videos outside of the community. And I think that that's something that people should realize, and that we all have the power as individuals to shape our lives, our society, and our community. So that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. I was wondering if, in your experience, have you found that teenagers maybe pick up this stuff easier than adults, or are more naturally inclined to do it?
Definitely. I feel that one of the wonderful experiences as I work with teenagers is that teenagers have the tendency to be themselves more than adults. I think as we grow older, we get caught up in the rules and the structures of society that many times oppresses people, and that makes people run in tracks that have been pretty much been done in advance by certain people, and you just follow those tracks, and unfortunately there is not much room for you to be yourself. So kids are really great because not only they demystify the making of media by making sure that they do videos as they want to, but they speak up their minds without having to make up stories, but they say whatever they feel, so that sometimes they might make fool out of themselves, but there is nothing wrong with it because we're human beings. What's wrong with it? You know, so that's why I just keep learning from them. So this is what we call education, the interaction that happens every day, not only with teenagers, but with any person. That's education. That's what we are doing here at the Somerville Community Access TV. And as we all know, even if you are an 80-year-old, you're a little creature in the universe, despite your PhDs and everything. So, you know, just let's think with our heads and feel with our hearts, and you'll be able to move farther and live a better life in this planet.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Would anybody like to comment on that? We have a couple of other calls.
No, I do want to point out, though, that everything that was just said about teenagers and video seems to be equally positive about teenagers and the internet. And I just saw a poster for a program that is one of my favorite internet sites, which is the Somerville Library internet classes that Sarah Smiley's been teaching. And I regularly go there and see what the kids have posted about themselves. So this is happening in all medium.
It actually made me think of an experience I had last fall addressing a group of highly placed media business people and people designing businesses for the internet. And I had an opportunity to present to them some web pages done by teenagers at the Somerville Community Computer Center. But I prefaced my showing them these pages by asking this room full of blue suits and wingtips how many people they knew that were on welfare or living in public housing projects. Most of them don't have the opportunity to interact with people who come from incredibly different walks of life than they do. And so as I stood up in front of them and showed them several web pages from our website of kids who do live in public housing developments, who in fact on their websites were offering arguments about how safe the places they live are and how good they are as teenagers and how unlike they are the popular conceptions of those teenagers in those parts of town. I had the chance to experience what I think is one of the most important things about open media, which is that the distances between us that we set up as part of your society fall away. I mean, it's over a network, but suddenly you have a chance to see what a kid's life is like in an area you'd be worried about walking through because of your suit or your car or your briefcase. So I think it was another example of how the networks serve us to weave the fabric of society.
Great. Let's go back to the telephone. Welcome to Dead Air Live.
Hi, I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm not a regular viewer of public access television, but I would say that probably 60 to 70% of the times that I have sort of flicked through and seen it, I've seen panel groups like this one and other discussions where people are, talking about what needs to happen, sort of what's going on with public access. What I'm wondering is, where is the content that these discussions are sort of happening for? Where are the actual programs that will sort of prove all the or answer all the questions that are out there? Do you understand my question?
Perhaps. Some people seem to have some answers, though, so hang on.
I hear two or three different questions, I guess, and one of them sounds to me like this is not content, what we're doing.
No, that I absolutely don't mean to say that.
No, I wasn't sure because it sounded like You were, and the reason I get that feeling is because you say that you see a lot of these discussions happening. I teach a class in Introduction to Video at my center on occasion, and people say to me, well, isn't it bad to make talking heads television programs? To which I usually respond, well, what are we doing now? We're two heads across a table and we're talking, and that's probably the reason that talk shows are so popular. But you know, the content that you're looking for is on your end of the phone. You are the content. That's the whole point. I gather you're not calling any other network program this evening and participating.
No, absolutely not.
Right. And you know, obviously, if you wanted to come on and do this yourself, you could, or for that matter, something completely different. So to coin a phrase, I don't think that any of us here can either answer all the questions or say what programs there are that are going to answer all the questions, except to say we hope that there's an opportunity for them to be there if they need to be. I can recall an occasion when I worked in another community where in the early 80s, drugs were becoming an extremely difficult problem in one part of the community, and they asked the Public Access Center to turn over the channel for 48 hours to let people come in and tell their stories. We did that, and it was 48 hours, 2 days in a row, nonstop of talking heads, but we had, you know, a mother come in who had lost her son to a drug overdose, read a poem that he had left as a suicide note, who had just walked, you know, from her bus stop into the studio and sat down and began speaking. You know, there's lots of stories like this, and you know, you kind of get, you know, warm and fuzzies from this, I guess, but the fact of the matter is that it's whatever the community can put into it, and
Right.
it's the safety valve that doesn't exist anywhere else anymore. We tend to not get together in the groups that we used to in the past, through time. You know, for whatever reason, although there are many, you know, much of our communities still participate in religious observance, those communities are more spread out now, so that there isn't the getting together of the communities at other times during the week. People get together on public access as if they were on their front porch, I like to say in kind of a homey analogy, you know.
I certainly don't mean to have a accusational tone. I mean, I think what you're doing is wonderful, and I certainly support, you know, not only the right but the actualization of this kind of discourse. I guess.
Caller, excuse me a moment. Will you please just hang on the line? We have to take a brief break for about 2 minutes to change our record tape.
Oh, sure.
And then we'll be right back.
Okay.
Just hang on. So we are going to take a break now, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Thanks.
I mean, it's so necessary. We use it a lot. We have open line. If you ever listen to one of our open lines to the community, you would see how much it's used. Sometimes you can even get to all the calls. I do networkization for citizenship on it. I teach on it. We discuss. This is not a hobby that we do with SCAT. This is community service. Okay? And I should be very clear about that, or I want to be very clear about that. We do community service with SCAT and in conjunction with SCATV. I've been doing this for 6 years, starting in Cambridge. So whatever the issues are, I really hope and I plead with you that you work them out, or that we work them out, because SCAT in this day and age of open communication and community outreach, we need it. It's there, it's serving, it's being used. Okay, so again, whatever you're contemplating, whatever the issues are, I would say to you, let's work them out, because we need SCAT. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back to the studio. We kind of interrupted you, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to ask the caller what sort of programming he had in mind or was looking for from our public access stations, or if he had something in particular that he was thinking about.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know exactly, and if I did, I'd probably be producing a show. I've been thinking about that, and I really can't. I can't put my finger on exactly, you know, what I would want in a perfect world out of public access. But the situation as it is, it seems like there's a lot of talk about where the money's going to come from, how the law should be, you know, exactly read, and you know these kind of details about public access. And I guess what I'm sort of asking do you ask these questions and try to work them out, then go for the content, or do you just sort of, go headstrong with the content and hope that those questions will be answered, through the production of shows over time?
Well, I guess the interesting answer to your question is when the Speaker's Corner used to be down by Park Street Church in Boston, no one talked about what anyone was going to say when they stood up on their peach box, and the same thing is true of public access. We are in fact forbidden by federal law from engaging in a consideration of content. It is not our role to create content as public access center operators. It's our role to facilitate your ability to create whatever content you want. And I think that's the important point, is that it's not what you see is what you get. What the community has to offer is what you get. And I think if you stop by SCAT and look around the lobby at some of the photos of some of the programming that's gone on here over the years, and look through some of the archives of some of the programming, you'll see some of the amazing things that this community has to offer that certainly I would bet that no one who signed on the original agreement would have imagined coming out of here, but certainly fit the definition of a community expression. And I think that's, so that's why we're somewhat at a loss when someone says, well, what are you planning? What are you going to have when you get this money? What are you going to make with it? We're going to make the door open. We're going to teach people how to use the tools, and we're going to have the cable time available so that people can make their programs whatever they may be. And I think that's the point.
And I'd actually like to build on that, from my own limited sort of viewpoint in terms of media arts. I was recently looking over 6 years of media arts programming I've done in town, and of that it's about one show a month of programming various places around Boston and eastern New England. I've done 2 shows on video media art made at public access channels from all over Massachusetts, so an incredible amount of work. I've done 2 shows on KidVid, videos made by teenagers and younger in communities, again, all over New England. And then there have been a number of other shows that a great majority of the work has come from public access channels, like poetry video, dance video, and performance video. So in terms of people being able to express themselves in novel and interesting ways, if the equipment's there, they do it.
All right, caller, thanks very much.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, we've got another call that's been waiting for a while, so let's try to get that. Hello, welcome to Dead Air Live.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Community access is only as good as the community's access to it. So I guess my question pertains to the service providers themselves and the costing of their services to the people of Somerville. Obviously, with the coming of internet access at our doorsteps, negotiations on a city level and as consumers to get the costs down will hopefully propel our community forward greatly. And I just wanted to get the panel's comments on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, I think the expectation is that with cable competition that rates will go down. But then again, I think that with various types of services provided and as our need increases, with rate regulation gone, that we're increasingly vulnerable to large corporations. I've got a chart outside there that looks at 5 major corporations own a huge amount of the telecommunications available, both in terms of content and in terms of providing the systems that those go out on. And one of the negative things that was in the Telecommunications Act of last year allowed a lot of these providers to not only run the systems but also run the content. So they've really created more of a stranglehold. And I think your point was well taken of in these head-to-head competitions, there's going to be fewer competitors. People are going to start dying left and right.
I would ask whomever is making the statement that rates will go down, what they're basing that on. If they're basing it on the competition between the corner grocery on this corner and the corner grocery on that corner, then they're very mistaken, because cable is not like that at all. ESPN charges cable companies, I don't know what it is this year, probably 82 cents per subscriber per month, whether it's RCN or Continental. They're not going to change the rate of their product. That's what the cable company delivers to you, among other things. The cost of copper wire is a pretty fixed cost. So it's just going to be a question of, I mean, are we going to get into one of these advertising wars where it's a dime a minute or 9 cents for 59 seconds, or this, you know, these long distance services that bombard us with something that doesn't really affect us, any of us? I mean, does any of us really care whether we pay 19 cents or 20 for 19 seconds or 21 seconds of long distance time? I mean, it's really silly how much apparent competition there is in these businesses, which really are competing for the same market. It's analogous to what's going on in Somerville with these two companies. So I don't see, that there's a definite predictor that rates are going to go down, especially since they've been almost entirely deregulated beyond the scope of local communities with the Telecommunications Act. And secondly, I don't see that there's going to be an enlargement of the pool of money available for community use. I don't think that, you know, the cable industry and telecommunications industries are very mature now. They've reached their they've carved out the size of their market. So they just want to take away from one another, I think, in a lot of ways. And it's not going to expand the market that much, I don't believe.
This is in terms of just cable that you're talking.
In cable, certainly, I don't see, I mean, cable penetration rates, which is the degree to people who could get cable, do get cable, have pretty much plateaued in communities, in some cases gone down with satellite dishes and, you know, people just, you know, not able to afford it anymore.
You seemed to indicate earlier that you thought that there would be a lot more revenue coming from internet access. And
I think
that
internet
part of it.
access, unquestionably, that's a whole new pool of customers, and it's incremental revenue. It's additional money that people are going to be spending, and certainly that is something that we ought to be spending our time thinking about. You know, I think, but on the other hand, I think people that are thinking that cable rates are going to come down because there's two cable companies in town, I think are dreaming, frankly, and I don't mean to insult anyone, but you know, their costs are not going to budge, but they're going to keep it going up. You know?
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Shrewsbury. You've got a unique situation there. Maybe you could explain how that works a little bit.
Well, what makes it unique is that the town actually owns and operates the cable system and the electric light system. It was the electric light system that that department in the town hall said, we'll go out to bid for the cable service back in the early 80s. And the main reason they got it, it was a huge cost at that time to build that system, but there was a lot of promises, and PEG access was an important promise of that, as well as an institutional network built throughout the town that schools and town departments and other places would be part of.
The city bid against another cable company?
That's right. So it became an island within Greater Media Cable, which just surrounds us.
Okay.
And it has been very fruitful and very successful. And it was very odd in recent years. Talking with people at the Mass Cable Commission or other people in the cable industry would say, "Oh yeah, Shrewsbury, are you guys bankrupt yet?" There was all this negative feeling like, "Oh, you guys, you know, you must be going bankrupt." And I was like, "No, you know, we're ahead of the game," which was true. And the cable department in town has moved ahead and tried to stay ahead with technology of what's going on in the rest of the world. So that included building a fiber optic network, using the fiber optics for the TV transmission as well as live transmission for us throughout the town, and then getting an internet server and hooking up schools and buildings to the internet. And now that's growing to the point where they're actually offering internet service to some larger businesses and sort of testing the waters of whether they could just be the internet provider to the rest of the community. And it's really just a matter of, you know, when the cost goes down on the cable box to have that. And the latest development is also using a lot of that fiber for a phone system that the town school has, but not residents yet.
Well, is there a tension within the city between people who want the money to go towards public access sort of stuff versus people who think the money should just be profit
Well-
for the city to pave roads, or?
No, things are pretty smooth right now. There was tension in the beginning, but at the public access facility, we have to work the same way SCAT does in doing a lot of outreach and hoping that there's a lot of community involvement, so that we can back up why that this money is going to good reasons. And so we've developed this collaboration with everyone in the community and the politicians and everyone. So there's not a tension. But there's also you got to understand that all the profit goes into the town. We get a percentage, which goes to PEG access, plus a lot of other benefits. But the rest, it goes right into the coffers. And it just is a cash cow. You know? It's a cash cow everywhere. But they're not saying that.
Right.
Well, the interesting thing, I think, is that, you know, what we're all talking about is what's good public policy for telecommunications technology. That's what we're trying to talk about in kind of in an abstract way, but in Somerville here you're dealing with two hard-nosed commercial companies that are going to be competing, whereas in Shrewsbury you're talking about the body that's responsible for public policy is the body that's running the telecommunications infrastructure, which is a very interesting experiment because you get what the community wants in terms of that infrastructure without any argument about what's the profit, because the profit's plowed right back into performing the service.
And there aren't these other groups out there saying, you know, we need to compete and we need to have, you know, the best service for this. A lot of this money, business, corporate stuff, which sort of leaves this interactive part separate. The community is always part of it. So when the cable department said, you know, I was looking at this internet thing, you know, we could hook up an internet server to our fiber. The rest of us said, yeah, and what could we do? Well, we'll have public access. So, you know, the first thing was public access at the library and the schools and at our place and on the bookmobile. And that was and the cable department, who runs the place like a business, that was, you know, on the top of their agenda. Like, we're going to get internet access, and of course we're going to use it, but, you know, we're going to have it to for the public, because they're serving the public.
Right.
So.
Well, I think it sort of brings up of what a beautiful world that would be.
Dream on.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to do with, obviously, RCN and Time Warner are out to make profits. And, you know, I would like to have a Pollyanna attitude and think, you know, if only we could ask RCN and Time Warner nice enough that they would recognize, yes, we're going to be providing internet services. It's only fair. It's only fair that they provide some sort of other aspect, a community component to it. And it just makes sense. And we can create, and if we do it the right way, we might be able to make more profits and have more people knowing how to use the tools. I recently did a survey of the nonprofits in Somerville and found 25 of them responded. 85% of them said that technology was extremely or very important to them. All but one of them had computers, all but one of them had modems. Most of them didn't use them. They just sat there. And here are the people that have the most reason to use them because it would be cheaper for them in terms of their budgets, in terms of mailing and research and time. And yet they don't have the means of how to do it. So how are they going to sell these services to the rest of the community?
Well,
they're leaving out these whole markets.
I really think that that's another, the industry pipe dreaming itself, that because they build it, they will come. I mean, they need to have educated consumers. This is not, you know, this is not, you know, a rubber ball to bounce on the floor. This takes a little bit more involvement of intellect and skills to use this technology. And clearly, it's in the interest of those companies to have the training out there. I think that public access to television has provided a means for the entire community to understand what cable television is. 14 years ago, the city of Boston had no cable system. People in Boston didn't know what cable television was. Meanwhile, a short while away in New York, they'd had cable for years and everybody knew what it was. But it's, I think, organizations like our own that help people come to terms with technology in addition to having access to it. We're not all about coming here, produce a program, put it on a channel. We're also about sharing information and skills and knowledge of technology too. And I think that's a point that's missed too often, that the experience of being involved in a technology center or an access center is something as important as the product, so to say.
Well, and we were talking earlier about that we are doing media literacy training, and that just as you're taught to read and write growing up, you're not just taught to read, you're actually taught to also how to author it. And what we're doing with the systems right now, by not having public access, is saying that we're only going to be able to receive this information, and that nobody will ever give us a pencil. And unless you can afford a pencil, you're not going to get one, and we're not going to share it with you.
Imagine if your telephone rang and you could only listen.
Yeah. You only get radio. But one thing that I wanted to bring up with you is in terms of my thing of, isn't it a decent thing for them to think about internet access? And one of the problems that we're having is how these multiple systems, that there are regulations right now on cable systems, and there are regulations on telephone systems, and right now RCN is sort of straddling the two systems, that their cable system is going to be regulated by the Massachusetts Cable Commission, and their telephone and internet under the Public Utility Commission, and that this is going to be kind of crazy.
Well, you pretty much simplified and outlined the public policy question that faces us in the state of Massachusetts, because RCN, not to forget, is partners with Boston Edison, and they are a public utility. And so, once again, are they fish or fowl? How are they regulated? Public utilities are not allowed, for example, to take money that they charge telephone customers and subsidize the building of a cable system. They must report the allocation of costs to the Public Utilities Commission. Cable company, on the other hand, is perfectly entitled to take money it makes from its cable customers and build an internet structure in a community, much as Continental has done in Newton. They've taken profits from cable customers to build this internet access. It so happens that it is also the cable that the television pictures are coming on. It's a hybrid fiber coax system. So they're doing both. This is the thing that I think has convinced companies like RCN that the cable television model is the more favorable regulatory environment. Meanwhile, the state chapter of the Alliance for Community Media is going to be working in the next year with the state legislature to see what we can do about a statewide telecommunications law, because I think one is needed. We're getting to a place where John Petroni, the cable commissioner of the state of Massachusetts, John Howe, the commissioner of the Public Utilities Commission, sometimes don't know which way to jump. Well, I mean, is this Boston Edison, or are they sending us, data and programming through their pipe? I mean, it's a question that has to be answered before we really go forward with this.
I think that also brings up a question that I think is something I've been thinking about, and I hope would be helpful, is that although we can't change the Telecommunications Act of '96, and we are still able to, there are things we can work within those parameters. And I think it's important for people to understand that it is municipalities, it is cities that are negotiating with the cable companies. And your city government isn't as far away as your federal government. But in between those two extremes of local and federal, there are other levels at which we can be working to ensure that the fair kinds of things happen in our community. I don't know if you can speak to, or any of us around the table can talk about some of the ways people can get involved in making a difference. Certainly coming to a public hearing in Somerville is one way to do it. Tuning into a show like this is another. What other things can people do to ensure that these kinds of things are happening the right way?
Well, just following up on what you said, the Telecommunications Act, one of the most important things that it did do was turn over more power to the states to regulate these industries within the states.
Right.
They've said back to the states, we don't want to regulate this at the federal level. So this is now the next step, is to pay attention to state government and to find out what the state regulatory bodies are doing, and to make sure that there are provisions. We're proposing a Telecommunications Act that would require all providers of telecommunications services by wire to provide 5% of their local revenues to the local communities to be administered on a statewide level, so that everyone knows that their dollar is worth 95 cents, and the 5 cents pays for, traffic cops when the street gets opened, and public access television, and community technology centers, and whatever else the local community feels it needs to do in order to make good this huge amount of profit, let's not forget, that private companies are making from the use of public rights of way. I mean, it's unprecedented when you think about it. If you think back to all the arguments about, Coca-Cola machines in Little League fields and whether or not that's advertising on public property. I mean, a cable company is basically using a public property, as are the phone companies, to reap enormous amounts of profit from that public property. So I think that we want to fight for a state regulation which requires all providers of such services by wire to contribute to a fund, and that fund be allocated based on subscribers to the services in the community.
Okay, we have another phone call, so let's check this out. Hello, welcome to Dead Air Live.
Hi, I've heard that SCAT is considered a telecommunications lab for the rest of the country. Could you comment on that?
Oh.
Wow. Well, unless we have that reputation.
Yeah.
That's a call from California, right?
Well, SCAT was one of the first access centers to become a nonprofit organization. When we first started, that we were run by the cable company, and then recognizing that the cable company didn't have any motivation to actually make it work. It got taken away from them, and we said, the amount of money you're wasting doing it, give it to us and we'll do it right. So I think SCAT became a model of how to do it right, and an awful lot of other communities followed the lead, and that's part of why Massachusetts in particular is really strong in terms of public access. In some ways I feel like we're spoiled here. There are other parts of the country that are just empty of these kind of resources, and that the wealth of knowledge that we have to hang on.
I know that our access facility was modeled through looking at Cambridge and Somerville a lot. But that is a problem in that a lot of people, when they talk about access and cable access, they talk about it as something that didn't work, because it hasn't worked everywhere. There's a lot of places where there really isn't cable access. There's something they call it cable access. It might be a cable company that says, oh, we'll offer this channel to the community to do what they want, and you can come down to our place, whatever. And that's the last you hear from them. And 10 years later, they say, we spent all this money on the public access, and no one in your town wants to do anything, so it's not worth it.
Right.
And that's it's like opening up a library where no one can read.
If I may, true confessions of a former cable company employee, because for 10 years I ran, in another state, I ran a community television
Station, which is exactly what you've described. It was in the cable company, and it was operated by the cable company, and everything was fine with the president of my company so long as I didn't spend one dime on that operation. And I mean, that's the truth. And therefore, the way to not spend any money was to not turn the lights on. So if anybody wanted to use the station, they had to jump through 6 hoops and over 9 fences in order to get there. And that was not access. I mean, it was called access, and the city called it access, and we always, and I don't mean to be cynical, but it's a fact. We'd always trot out, the little old lady that had the talk show, and the people from the Hispanic community that were putting on some sort of program, and there were 3 or 4 people that the cable company held up as being examples of access. But I was on the inside, so I understood that the man who ran the company had a job to do, and his job was to make sure that he got 52 cents on the dollar of every piece of dollar invested in that company, and if I was going to take away from that, then I was going to have to be done away with. And eventually I was, actually. So, but I mean, and that's what's wrong with that model. It's not consistent with a company's goals to give something away,
That's the situation that we had in Somerville in the first contract, where Warner provided public access. They provided some minimal amount of equipment. They didn't maintain it, and it quickly went down the tubes. And it was, people who were trying to produce programs really couldn't use the equipment to do it. They basically killed it by neglect, and that was the impetus for getting an independent company to come in later. We have like 1 minute left, so I'd just like to toss it open if anybody wants to say anything else, for 15 seconds or something like that.
Well, I think Somerville is still a model for a lot of other communities to learn from. And hopefully, as these things happen, the community can recognize that and realize that as they're moving forward.
And hopefully it'll be a model into a whole new technology.
Right.
That's the opportunity
Yeah.
that's presented with us, and if we can only come together to help that happen.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. It's been a very interesting
Thank you.
conversation. Tune in Friday night at 10 o'clock for a repeat of this show, or next week, also Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. Until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.